Ukraine has unleashed an invisible offensive that strikes where it hurts most, the Kremlin's wallet. September 2025 marks a turning point with a series of drone strikes that have paralyzed Russian oil exports, evaporating billions in vital revenues for Moscow's war machine. Giant refineries, steel and fire fortresses processing millions of barrels daily, turned into controlled infernos by devices that cost as much as a used car. This is not propaganda. It's the raw reality of strikes that have reduced Russia's refining capacity by 20%, forcing pauses in exports and sending shockwaves to global markets. We unpack the operation step by step, from the intelligence that planned it to the smoke still rising over Saratov and Samara. This is not just destruction. It's a siege on Russia's energy empire. The backdrop of this offensive is an escalation that has transformed the war into a brutal energy duel. Since the invasion began in February 2022, Russia has relied on its oil exports to fund its war machine, generating over $500 billion annually despite Western sanctions. Ukraine, for its part, has seen its energy infrastructure devastated. More than 600 Russian drones and missiles fell in a single attack on September 18th, leaving entire regions in darkness. But Kyiv does not surrender. It responds with lethal asymmetry. In September, a wave of drones, at least 361 in one night on September 14th, has hit key refineries, from the vast Kurishi complex in the north to the Saratov petrochemical plant in Bashkortostan. These are not isolated attacks. They are a calculated pattern where each impact not only destroys infrastructure but disrupts flows that represent 40% of Russia's budget. The rising smoke is no mere spectacle. It is the symbol of an economy that bleeds, with the ruble falling 2% after the first blow-in. Saratov and analysts forecasting production cuts that could cost $100 billion annually if the campaign persists. The epicenter of this firestorm was the Saratov refinery, a southern Russian colossus processing 250,000 barrels daily of Urals crude, the lifeline for sales to India and China. On September 14th, Ukrainian drones, launched from hidden positions in Odessa and guided by jamming-resistant AI, burst into the night, impacting key processing units. Leaked videos on social media show secondary fireballs rising at dawn, with black smoke columns stretching for kilometers, visible from commercial satellites like Maxar. It was not a lucky hit. SBU intelligence had mapped gaps in Panzer S-1 defenses, exploiting low flights at 3 meters above the ground to blend with radar clutter. The initial damage was estimated at $150 million, but the real blow came 6 days later, on September 20th. A second swarm returned, igniting 40% of the site's capacity and forcing an indefinite operational pause. The Guardian reports that these attacks have left Saratov running at 60%, a collapse that disrupts 10 million tons annually of petroleum derivatives, equivalent to billions in lost revenues when multiplied by the global supply chain. Russia, in panic, activated emergency firefighting systems, but the persistent smoke, visible from the M6 highway, is an unrelenting reminder of how a $5 million drone swarm can paralyze a $10 billion asset, hundreds of kilometers to the east. In Samara Oblast, the drama repeated with surgical precision. The Novokuybishevsk refinery, operated by Rosneft with a capacity of 260,000 barrels daily, was targeted on the same September 20th. Sources from the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed 2 direct hits on distillation units, releasing rivers of crude that fueled secondary fires, with explosions reverberating like thunder across the steppe. Al Jazeera details how these strikes not only destroyed physical infrastructure but contaminated local reserves, forcing evacuations in nearby villages and raising environmental alerts in the Volga region. The cost, $200 million immediate. But the domino effect is devastating. Samara represents 5% of Russian refining, and its paralysis has diverted shadow fleet tankers to longer, more expensive routes, increasing freight by 15% and reducing exports to Asia by 500,000 barrels daily. It is a stranglehold felt at every Moscow gas station, where gasoline prices rose 12% in a week, a direct stab at the Russian consumer that the Kremlin cannot hide. But the siege did not stop at the south. Bashkortostan, in the heart of Russia, felt the sting on September 18th. The Gazprom Neftekhim Saratov refinery and petrochemical complex, a monster producing 10 million tons annually of derivative products, was hit by drones that penetrated 1,500 kilometers from Ukraine, Reuters confirms that the impacts damaged storage tanks and pipelines, triggering a fire that lasted hours and released toxic clouds over the city of Saratov. A source from the SBU in Kyiv revealed that the strike was guided by hacks into Russian IoT systems, blind to low-altitude aerial threats, allowing the drones to evade Krasuka 4 jamming. The immediate damage, $300 million, but the real horror is the disruption of chemical chains. Plastics, fertilizers, and fuels that Russia exports to Europe and Asia, now on pause, with accumulated losses scaling to billions when considering the effect on global industries. Local residents in leaked telegram posts describe a black sky that suffocates, a living testimony of how these attacks transcend the military to strike everyday life. To the north, in Leningrad Oblast, the Kurishi refinery, the largest in Russia, with 400,000 barrels daily, burned briefly on September 14th after a massive attack of 361 drones. Although the fire was extinguished quickly, the impact on catalytic cracking units paralyzed 30% of production, according to Rosneft sources. Forbes analyzes that these strikes give Ukraine economic leverage, forcing Russia to prioritize defenses over ground advances, with a cumulative cost of $1.5 billion in direct damage in September alone. The smoke from Kurishi does not dissipate easily. It symbolizes a Ukrainian strategy that turns refineries into priority targets, reducing Russia's total refining capacity to 2019 levels and threatening a deficit of 1 million barrels daily in exports. The tactic behind this strangulation is a masterclass in modern warfare. Ukraine has perfected FPV drone swarms launched from maritime containers in the Black Sea or camouflage trucks in Sumy, flying over 1,000 kilometers with refueling stops in allied positions. Each drone carries 50-kilo warheads, guided by AI that adjusts routes in real time to evade Pantsir and Buk M3, systems Russia claims are impenetrable but fail against low, saturated threats. The SBU, with hacks into Russian satellites, identifies not only locations, but patrol schedules and jamming gaps, like in Saratov, where a preliminary cyber attack blinded IoT cameras. It is a preparation that lasts weeks. Analysts in Lviv model Volga winds and Baltic waves, ensuring 70% of drones reach targets. The Washington Post describes this as precision economic warfare, where a $15,000 drone destroys $50 million in infrastructure. Multiplying ROI by a factor of $3,000 Russia, the wounded Colossus responds with unbridled fury. On September 20th, in retaliation for Saratov and Samara, Moscow launched its largest aerial attack of the month. 600-plus drones and missiles against 9 Ukrainian regions, leaving Chernihiv in flames. But the balance breaks. While Russia spends $10 billion on air defenses, Ukraine produces drones locally in Kharkiv factories, assembling 500 units weekly with components from Poland, and the U.S. Euronews reports that these strikes have forced Rosneft to pause gasoline exports, exacerbating internal shortages and raising prices by 15% in Moscow, a jab the Kremlin cannot hide. The global impact is a silent earthquake. With Russian exports falling 10%, Brent jumped 4% in 48 hours, affecting everything from U.S. gas stations to Chinese factories. Forbes warns that if Ukraine maintains the pace, and with allies promising more components, Russia could cut production in November, a collapse that would evaporate $100 billion and weaken its war capacity. Billions in smoke, not hyperbole. It is the cold calculation of a war where oil is the true battlefield. In this duel of shadows and fire, Ukraine has proven that strangulation is deadlier than frontal bombardment. Billions in crude disappear in smoke, leaving Russia coughing in the dark. The next target? Arctic platforms or the Druzhba pipeline. The world holds its breath. And the price of the gallon.